At the start of the movie, we see David Banner, who is a genetics researcher for the government trying to improve human DNA. David has been experimenting with various species ranging from starfish to frogs, but he just hasn't been able to get the right results. He tells his supervisor, Colonel Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross, that they have to experiment on humans in order for the tests to work, but Ross forbids human experimentation, so David experiments on himself. The experiment mutates his genes. Once his wife Edith gives birth to their son Bruce, David realizes Bruce inherited his mutated genes. He attempts to find a cure for Bruce's condition, but the government, represented by Ross, shuts down his research after learning of his dangerous experiment. In a fit of rage, David causes a massive explosion of the facility's gamma reactor. He then goes to his house and has a fight with Edith, but their discussion leads to David accidentally killing his wife. The murder makes Bruce repress his early childhood memories. David is committed to a mental hospital while 4-year-old Bruce is sent into foster care. A woman who identifies herself as Mrs. Krenzler adopts him, and Bruce assumes the surname. Growing up, he believes his birth parents are dead. 30 years later, Bruce Banner is a brilliant scientist at the University of California in Berkeley, working with nanomeds and gamma radiation to cure cancer and other diseases. Unfortunately, all of his experiments end in the test animals exploding. He works with Ross's estranged daughter Betty Ross. They were recently romantically involved but have broken up because Betty was too withdrawn emotionally, although neither of them knows it. Their fathers worked together on an army base in New Mexico in the late 1960s. One day, Glenn, who used to work for the same lab as Betty and Bruce but has since moved on to a private research company, Atheon, visits the lab. He flirts with Betty and offers her and Bruce an unlimited budget if they're willing to bring their research to his corporation. Glenn is interested in the scientist's nanomeds research to create regenerating soldiers for the military-industrial complex. They both refuse, but Bruce's anger begins to rise anyway. Next, David Banner reappears and begins infiltrating his son's life, working as a janitor in the lab building. Ross, now an army general, also begins investigating Ross. The estranged father of Bruce's ex-girlfriend and co-researcher Betty Ross is concerned for his daughter's safety around Bruce because Bruce is working in the same field as David. The following day at their lab, Bruce's assistant Harper tries fixing a gamma sphere, but it quickly goes non-functional. It exposes Bruce to a deadly amount of nanomeds and gamma radiation. As he saves Harper, the radiation combines with Bruce's already altered DNA. Unlike the other test subjects, however, he doesn't die afterward. He sits in a hospital bed telling Betty that he has never felt better, which she can't believe since the nanomeds have killed everything else they've touched. Even his broken knee is healed now. Bruce realizes that the radiation triggered something in him, making him a completely different person with enormous strength and healing capabilities. Betty is confused but tells him to take care of himself before leaving his room. That night, Bruce is visited by a strange man who had earlier begun to work at the lab as a janitor. Although Bruce doesn't recognize him, it's his father David. His father suggests that Bruce has secret reserves of power hidden within him, then disappears. He later uses samples of Bruce's DNA for animal experimentation. In the next scene, Betty finally confronts her estranged father about Glenn's interference at the lab, but General Ross says that he's only worried about his daughter's safety. But Betty realizes that her father is more concerned about the nanomeds experimentation than his daughter. After being released from the hospital, Bruce returns to work. There's a voice message from Betty in which she discusses the meeting she had with General Ross about Glenn's offer. Bruce's rage begins to spiral out of control, and soon after, the building rage within him stemming from the growing stresses around him. His father, who has suddenly appeared in his life, Betty's message, and Glenn's condescending offer activates his gamma-radiated DNA, triggering his first transformation into the Hulk. We see that Bruce has transformed into a superhumanly powerful green-skinned creature. He destroys the lab and throws the gamma radiation generator into the parking lot. When he sees his father observing his rampage, the Hulk leaps away in confusion. After the lab's destruction, Betty finds Bruce unconscious in his home. Bruce barely remembers his transformation as well as the destruction, describing them as sensations similar to birth. He tells Betty that their new janitor visited him and confessed that he was his father. Then Ross arrives at the scene suspicious and sends Betty off because Bruce was the last person in the lab. He is under suspicion of destroying it and is placed under lockdown by Ross. In the next scene, Betty tracks down an old house where she finds the janitor / Bruce's father, David Banner. She asks him about Bruce, but he only gives her cryptic answers. In the process, David acquires Betty's scarf. He also tells her about Bruce's power before currently showing her the door. After hours of interrogation, Ross puts Bruce under house arrest, takes over the lab, and threatens Bruce to stay away from Betty. That night, Betty drives to her cabin in the woods. Meanwhile, David has created a trio trio of super-powered Gamma dogs using equipment stolen from the labs using a scarf she left behind. He gives the dogs Betty's scent and sends them to kill her. He then calls Bruce to tell him he's done so to coax the Hulk out of him. Just then Glenn arrives to confront Bruce about trying to remove him from his post. Earlier Betty had complained to her father about Glenn snooping around their lab and attempting to make an offer. Therefore Betty's father ordered Glenn to stay away from his daughter and Bruce. Glenn is enraged at the outcome, so he attempts to assault Bruce but manages only to anger him enough to start another transformation into the Hulk. Bruce grabs Glenn's hand and nearly crushes it while turning green, shocking Glenn. Bruce's enhanced strength hurls him onto the couch and Bruce transforms again. The now transformed Hulk throws Glenn out of the house and Ross's henchmen opened fire, further angering the Hulk and increasing his size. He then throws Glenn at a henchman, knocking them out and injuring Glenn's neck, then leaps off to find Betty at her mountain cabin. Betty encounters Bruce in his Hulk form. From him making Hulk grow bigger with his rage. As the Hulk escapes the hardened foam, Glenn uses a grenade launcher against him and gets himself killed. Ross decides to free Hulk from the base and then destroy him outside. The Hulk destroys 4 heavy military tanks and leaps off into the desert to hide. Ross and his forces find him and he leads the army on a chase throughout the southwestern United States, battling briefly with 2 Comanche choppers firing on a series of rock towers to bury him. The Hulk escapes and heads in the direction of San Francisco. There he proceeds to wreak havoc in the city. Meanwhile, Betty contacts her father and convinces him to take her to the Hulk, believing he needs a chance to calm down. Upon seeing Betty, Bruce's love for her comes through and he returns to his human state. David, who is now in custody, is allowed to visit the base and talk to Bruce. That night, Ross's army takes him to an abandoned warehouse where a captured Bruce is waiting for him. The meetup is monitored by the general and his armies. Bruce tells his father that he knows the truth about his mother. He realizes that his father actually wanted to end Bruce's life because of his mutant genes but accidentally killed his mother. when she tried to save him. David has descended into megalomania, wanting Bruce's power to destroy his enemies. He tries to persuade his son to accept his power and join him in destroying the military, but Bruce refuses. David then transforms into a powerful electric being after biting into a wire and absorbing the energy, and Bruce becomes the Hulk again. It leads to a long fight between them, during which the Hulk overloads David with his power. They eventually wind up at a secluded lake. David decides to absorb all of Bruce's power for himself. However, Bruce's power is so immense that David cannot contain it all and explodes. Both are presumed dead after Ross orders a gamma charge bomb, leaving no trace of either man. A year later, Betty Ross and her father operate under close yet strained conditions as the general tries to balance his attempts to comfort his daughter's loss with his mission to find Bruce. He hopes that if Bruce were ever to contact her, she would tell him, but he knows she wouldn't, so he has his daughter's phone bugged and is under surveillance 24/7, hoping to get Bruce in case he contacts her. As for Bruce, who is revealed to have survived, his goals are unclear. However, it seems that he's decided to direct his and the Hulk's abilities to helping those in need. Bruce is treating a boy in a South American jungle when guerrillas arrive and raid the camp, demanding medicine and confiscating the supplies. The leader speaks to Bruce, threatening him as his eyes begin to glow green. Bruce warns them not to make him angry. The movie ends as Hulk's roar is heard seconds later.